Last month, I asked my subscribers to take one of their favorite cartoon characters and redraw them in a different genre, which I retroactively thought would be really cool for Halloween because it's essentially characters dressing up as something else. And then I pushed that video back in order to make a video reviewing my first time at Comic-Con where I got one of my drawings signed by a voice actor. You should totally check that out after this video. But now we're moving on to our Halloween/October recreations video. So, let's create some chaos! Our first submission comes from Alden Throckmorton, who drew Kirishima from My Hero Academia in a more fantasy setting, and the lore goes as follows. Yujiro Kirishima, in the world you know, is known as the Red Riot, who's training to be a hero at UA High, just like his idol, the Crimson Riot. But in this world, we look at another version of Kirishima. Instead of being a superhero, he's training to become the world's greatest Harper, a division that seeks to protect and help the innocent while receiving little in return. There was just one little problem for Kirishima. He didn't have the confidence to think he could be as manly as the Harpers. On top of that, he didn't feel like he would fit in with them, as he was known as a Dragonborn, a half-human and half-dragon. But instead of having draconic limbs when he was born, he was able to shift different parts of his bodies into dragon scales. Even his limbs would become draconic. In retrospect, he thought he would be teased and called a freak. That wasn't until a giant ogre attacked his village. And even though the Harpers weren't able to stop something this size, something inside Kirishima was. He sprang into action, transforming his limbs into their draconic form, and made a mighty jump off the ground to reach the giant ogre. He punched the beast in the face, and he fell to the ground, now unconscious. The leader of the Harpers, known as the Crimson Fighter, thanked the young Kirishima before asking if he wanted to join the Harpers, as it would be the first time a dragon would be on the Harper squad. What he did to save his village took a lot of guts. Kirishima immediately agreed, feeling so much pride and happiness that he was able to face his fears and was now joining the one squad he always wanted to be a part of. But he wasn't the only one to join the Harper squad. During his training, multiple other empowered kids of various species joined the new adventure. Now with this video, I went all out with the artworks, especially when it came to perspective. I did some research rather than guesswork this time, as I mentioned in some of my previous videos, and tried out a whole bunch of different types of perspective within the 3 drawings here. For this first piece here, I went with the hardest possible one you could probably do. Fisheye perspective, which is where the entire piece is curved as if you were looking at it in an orb kind of thing, for lack of a better word. And I coupled that with a 1-point perspective in order to understand how the buildings would move into the vanishing point. The reason I went with fisheye was because I wanted to do a scene from the story that was provided for me by Alden Throckmorton, where Kirishima is leaping up to take out this ogre. And so I wanted to be looking directly down at him as Kirishima is flying towards us. And I tried it with some other perspective. I tried 2-point and 3-point, but none of them were really giving the results I wanted. So I tried out fisheye, and I was able to get to the point that I was really happy with. Granted, I probably could have just done 1-point too, but I'm really glad I tried something a little more difficult. With this angle, though, that I chose to depict the piece as, it would mean I had to do a lot of different background work, as we'd be seeing a lot of it since we were so far from the ground. We'd have a wider view of the background. And while I definitely believe I could have added more detail when designing the background, I think I added too much detail when I was rendering the background. In other words, I feel like I could have put more buildings both inside and outside the walls of the castle to give the area a little bit more life. The one stand of merchandise and the 2 houses inside the castle walls falls into that area where there's stuff there, but it doesn't feel fully realized. Though I think if I had scaled down the houses in the castle walls and moved the further wall back a little bit, it not only would have given me more room to work and add things, but it also would have made the castle seem grander, making it look like Kirishima was jumping even higher. Going off of that though, when I was in the rendering stage, I rendered the entire background as if it was the same distance from the camera, which is really the antithesis of this distance dynamic that I was going for. Because the further you move into the distance, the less detail you would see, meaning the bricks and the cobblestone on the back castle wall would not be as prevalent as the bricks and cobblestone on the more foreground of the castle wall. And the top of the tower should have a lot more detail than the wall of the castle itself. So with this whole perspective and background thing, I definitely need to work on adding less detail the further into the background the objects are going. However, on the lower half of the piece, I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. One of the things I've mentioned before when I'm trying to work on backgrounds is I'm not always happy with how flora turns out, including like trees and just plain grasslands. And so I've been experimenting with different styles and researching different webcomics and manga to see how other artists render nature. In specific, I was taking a lot of inspiration from a webcomic called Cast Off by the Starfish Face, and I'm going to try really hard not to geek out about it, but I will say that it is a really good webcomic and I highly recommend it, and for the heck of it, I'll just put a link to it in the description below. But moving on to the main subject of the piece, there's a lot of new areas I was trying when I drew out Kirishima, such as dynamic posing, foreshortening, and practicing some new shading and rendering techniques that I've been working on in the past few drawings. Overall, I think all the aforementioned things turned out really well, and I really like how the dragon parts of Kirishima turned out specifically. I broke down the texturing of the more draconic limbs into basic shapes, so instead of inking every single scale on the face and arms, I added in circles of various sizes with one of my highlight brushes, and then added shadows and rim lights to each one of those, which at a distance gives the illusion of a rough and textured dragon arm. Additionally, on top of the flats for the dragon skin, I airbrushed in a soft layer of orange on top of all the red to give it a subtle red to orange shift. And finally, I did this really cool thing with the dragon eye that I really liked. I made it a orange to yellow radial gradient in the eye, but then I created a bit of a starburst gradient by taking that same yellow and just dashing out lines out from the center of the pupil, which looks really, really cool. Overall, my first time trying fisheye perspective turned out really good. Let's take a look. Next up, we got Mateo Z Storyteller with the Powerpuff Droids, and they wrote, Dear KyngPin, hi, it's me, Mateo Z Storyteller, here with my entry for the October Recreations, the Powerpuff Droids. To some intelligent minds, robots are the future. But to others, robots are just hunks of junk that will lead to the apocalypse. Well, would you believe me if this became a reality? Deep in the technology-filled metropolis of Townstopia, one Professor Plutonium and one Mayor Shovelstache were hard at work. The two intelligent minds worked together for years trying to create the perfect battle androids. You see, for as long as Townstopia stood dazzling like a diamond, a mysterious species of alien called the Daemonox have been invading and taking the technology of Townstopia and using it as if they were their own. Professor Plutonium and Mayor Shovelstache have been working on a battle android to fight off the Daemonox armies. However, their first creation, simply called Project Luz, had been a failure. You see, if Luz was exposed to any kind of emotion that included high levels of voice, such as anger, happiness, or fear, it would cause her to erupt into an explosion of blue thunder. Soon, Luz ran away, never to be seen again. So the professor made some new androids. This specific group of 3 androids had rare crystals stored inside the energy cores. The red android, codenamed Blossom, had a crystal called Ruberix, the crystal that fueled the electricity of Townstopia. This gave Blossom the power to summon diamond-shaped energy shields around her, followed by an ice blade. The green android, codenamed Buttercup, had a crystal called Emeris, the crystal that fueled the vehicle power of Townstopia, giving Buttercup powerful energy blast. And finally, the blue android, codenamed Bubbles, had a crystal called Lapilus, the crystal that helped clean the waste out of the lakes and water fountains, giving her the ability to shoot flashing energy blast. The 3 android sisters then protected Townstopia, fighting off the Daemonox armies and occasionally going toe-to-toe with a rabid mutant chimpanzee named Mojo Jojo, and even unlocking new powers. But there was one question the androids always wondered about. What had become of their 4th sister? Now, when I first saw the designs and read the lore for this piece, there were so many ideas in my head of what I wanted to do here. Originally, I wanted to go with a very action-heavy type piece that either had Blossom blocking an attack or standing over Mojo Jojo, but most of the ideas really pushed Blossom into the background, which didn't really give the characters that were designed from this entry the chance to shine. So instead, I went with this idea that I have here, where Blossom is flying into action and soaring over the city, which gave me the opportunity to practice cityscape rendering and 3-point perspective. I think the last time I actually drew out a cityscape was when Popcross did that design challenge collab in September of last year, and I did my Ghostface, Ghost Rider, Murder Drones, and Fusion. Since then, I've done a couple of interiors and exteriors, but nothing to this scale. So while I did stick to more basic shapes for the buildings, which is what most city skylines are made of, so it's not out of place, this was a much more a practice in the 3-points perspective and the spacing of the buildings rather than the building designs themselves. And while no one's going to look at this city skyline and be inspired to make the next big metropolis, I think it turned out well enough for what it is. I especially like the street view that you can see at the very bottom of the piece. I feel like it makes the city feel more lively. I also went through, and to save some time and sanity for myself, went through and only rendered a couple of buildings out with different windows. But the ones I did choose to render out, I really like how they came out. I especially like the skyscraper ones, where almost the entire side of the building is just nothing but windows. And as you can undoubtedly tell at this point, maybe I don't know how long this time lapse is or where we are in it, but I was experimenting with different colors for the background. I was going for a type of, you wouldn't normally see things like this in this color type of palette, which was heavily inspired by the color changing palettes that they use in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime, and in part 4 of that series, Diamond is Unbreakable, where the town of Morio has a yellow sky and the streets are green, the mountains are purple, so on and so forth. I went with a green hue for both the sky and the buildings in this piece because I knew the main subject would be Blossom, and it would have been a nice contrast to the red and pink of that particular Powerpuff Droid, since green and red are complementary colors. And honestly, it was a really good decision. It doesn't feel unnatural, which is what I was worried the most about when trying it out. And the one thing I would change is maybe a bit more of a separation in greens between the sky and the buildings, just to separate them out a little bit more. And finally, when it came to Blossom and her energy trail, I went through the normal process of rendering out the Powerpuff Droid, largely ignoring any light that would have been coming from the energy trail itself. I then went back afterwards and added in red highlights to the brightest parts, and then adding a red color layer on top of the whole character to show that the droid was within the energy field. With that being said, I also really like the trail of energy, how it's looping from the background into the foreground. It really helps sell the motion of this piece. But Mateo Z Storyteller, thank you so much for submitting, and let's take a look at the final result. And last but not least, we have Owen Williams with Mario as a Dead by Daylight killer, with the lore as follows. Name: the Jumpman. Height: tall. Terror radius: 64 meters. Trial map: Toadstool Castle. Once a shining beacon of the peaceful Mushroom Kingdom and a safe haven for those who escaped the Jumpman's wrath, has now been transformed to the Jumpman's playground by the entity. And while its courtyard, hedge maze, multiple floors, and various rooms make this a very spacious realm, all this space means there are plenty more places the Jumpman can get you. And be warned, because coming down from too high can be a detriment to you. As in, you can either take damage or be stunned if you fall from too great of a height, as either the survivor or the Jumpman. Backstory. Once a regular plumber from Brooklyn, things changed in his life forever when he stumbled upon a large, mysterious green pipe. Entering it, he was transported to a fantasy world filled with many unique creatures and special objects that temporarily gave him incredible abilities, greatly helping him on his many adventures battling evil dragons and wizards, all to save the royal ruler of the land, of whom he would begin a romantic relationship with. One fateful day, on an adventure like any other, he found a strange mushroom which he consumed without much hesitation, assuming this was just a simple variant of the mushroom he eats to gain his new powers. In actuality, this mushroom was tainted by black magic, causing the plumber's limbs to extend to inhuman lengths and gain an unquenchable taste for blood, be it innocent or not, going on a rampage and killing whoever and whatever came into his line of sight. Soon all the lands in this world would be turned into a dead wasteland covered in the blood of those who lived in it. He often found the most enjoyment in chasing his prey as a sort of game to entertain himself, before going in for the kill. Soon, though, his rampage began to slow as he had killed almost all the people in the world, aside from those who would hold up at his former love's castle, due to him not wanting to risk harming her, as despite his monstrous transformation, his love for her still remained. That was until a mysterious fog encompassed him and transported him to a new world where a being known as the Entity resides and controls. Here, the Entity would speak to him, promising new players for his game of hide and seek for as long as he desires, which he would eagerly accept, gaining his own trial within the Entity's realm, where the survivors would have to do their best they can to survive him, though often they would learn the hard way that they cannot beat him. Weapon. The Jumpman's Ultra Hammer is a large metal mallet which the Jumpman can swing with ease for devastating blows, capable of shattering pallets and other breakables in one hit, though it will take 2 seconds for the Jumpman to steady himself after swinging with such force. Power. Super Jump. A key skill during his days adventuring, the Jumpman can reach great heights with a single leap. This power can allow him to reach higher areas of the map. Depending on how long the button is held, max holding time 4 seconds, if the Jumpman happens to land on a survivor, they will instantly be downed. However, performing such an act requires very precise aiming and can be easy to mess up. Now, unfortunately, there was so much more that Owen included in the lore that I had to cut for time reasons, but there were so much other stuff, including special items the Jumpman can use, a Yoshi as an ally, animation notes, voice line, the whole line. It was a full actualized character. This could work as a character pitch for Dead by Daylight, and I'm really sad I had to cut some of it, but amazing work. You put so much thought into this, Owen. Now, with all that being said, I struggled a little bit to come up with a perspective that would work best for the angle and pose that I wanted for this piece. I knew that I wanted to be looking at the Jumpman from a really low angle to give the menacing, powerful vibe that this character gives off. And I wanted to have him either looming over near the victim or resting his foot on like a rock or a skull or something. I thought originally fisheye would have been the best use of this, but I couldn't really quite get it to work, so I opted for a kind of 2-point, kind of 3-point perspective, and for the most part, this served its purpose. It turned out to be very menacing. However, at such a harsh angle, getting the anatomy correct was a little bit of a challenge to me, because I always forget that at harsh angles like this, there tends to be a lot of overlap between body parts. For example, the leg that's propped up on the skull would 100% be covering a little bit of the chest. I do believe it's definitely passable for what I did draw here, and it kind of aided me that part of the lore mentioned that the Jumpman's limbs were extended to inhuman lengths. So it made the character even creepier that the anatomy just seems a little bit off. We love working our flaws into the character design. The new comic-like style of shading where I add a near black layer to the darkest parts of the piece really lent itself well to this character. I had opted to put the lighting coming from both above and behind the character while framing his head in the moon to draw the viewer's eye upward. And because of that, almost the entire front of the character is shrouded in darkness. I could have pushed the darkest areas a little bit more, but I am very happy with how it turned out. And I don't know if this sounds weird, but I like how I leaned to a more cartoony style for this particular character. Not only is the nose super bulbous like normal Mario, which I don't think I would have if I was using my regular style, but I also forewent a lot of the detail and texture on parts of the characters such as the boots and the overalls to really focus more on the perspective and lighting of the piece. Overall, this might be my favorite piece of the episode. I really pulled out all the stops between the character, the background, and the rendering. And I hope you all enjoy it. Let's take a look at the final result. These might be by far some of my favorite pieces. I really like how the perspective turned out, and while I wouldn't say it was easy to understand, I was able to grasp how it works a lot quicker than I expected it to be. And I think using this as practice perspective really enhances each of the pieces in its own special way. Thank you to everyone who submitted. There were a lot of really, really good submissions, and I wish I could have gotten to more, but learning new things takes a little bit of time. But you all did an amazing job, and a special thank you and congratulations to those who were chosen: Alden Throckmorton, Mateo Z. Storyteller, and Owen Williams. I'll be sending the redrawings to you shortly after the video releases, and now it's time for the November 2024 Recreations prompt. I want all of you to design your own alien. That's it, plain and simple. Whatever that means to you, design one. All other details and due date is on the screen. Can't wait to see what you all submit. That's all I got for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button, and feel free to check out other community recreations up top, or that aforementioned Comic-Con video that I made from last week. My name is KyngPin, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.